Nazi Germany invested millions of Reichsmarks, thousands of hours, and all the power of propaganda to create perfect children, healthy, disciplined, and loyal. These children were meant to become the future of the Third Reich, soldiers and mothers for the new empire that, according to Hitler's plan, was supposed to rule the world for 1,000 years. This is how the organization was born that forever changed the understanding of what could be done with a child's mind: Hitler. Jugend seemed like a simple youth movement, but behind the campfire songs, marches, and sports competitions was a terrifying mechanism for shaping fanatics, ready to kill and die for the sake of ideas. This story is not just about the Nazis, it's a story about stolen childhoods, about youth turned into an instrument of war, about a state that decided love, play, and development were unnecessary if you can create an army of obedient machines. We will examine how Hitler Jugend sold nothingness and destroyed lives, how children were turned into informers, soldiers, and fanatics, and why, nearly 100 years later, this lesson from history has not become a thing of the past. I'm Semyon, opening the How Did They Live section. Let's start. How they sold Hitler Jugend. To the outside world, it looked like an ordinary youth organization. Sports, tourism, camaraderie, fresh air, everything parents love so much. In fact, the Hitler Jugend was built as a mirror of the scouting movement. Instead of singing campfire songs about nature, they sang about the Führer. Instead of camping skills, they learned marching drills and how to inform on others. By 1933, the year Hitler came to power, hundreds of thousands of German children were already members of various youth organizations. These included scouts, religious groups, and socialist clubs. This tradition dated back to pre-war Germany and experienced a real boom during the Weimar Republic. The Hitler Youth itself, that is, the Youth League of the Nazi Party, appeared back in 1922 after Hitler's failed beer hall putsch. The organization was formally disbanded, but as usual, it went underground. In 1926, the movement received its iconic name, Hitler Youth, the League of German Working Youth. The main goal of the propaganda is to create an illusion of unity and happiness. Hitler Youth promised that every child would find a place here and become part of Germany's great future. You are respected, you are needed, you are a future hero. In an atmosphere of poverty and the decline after Versailles, with unemployment, this was more than convincing. But along with physical training and songs, there was a subtle, carefully calculated ideological indoctrination. In children's books, the image of the Jew as a villain, in fairy tales, lessons of hatred, children didn't notice how, from good-natured, trusting boys and girls, they were turning into carriers of an ideology of hatred. This was part of a systematic approach. Hitler Youth covered almost the entire population of Germany, step by step turning from a voluntary initiative into a mandatory part of every child's life. By 1930, the organization already had 25,000 teenagers. At that time, members were boys from 14 to 18 years old. Later, a junior group called Deutsches Jungvolk appeared for boys from 10 to 14 years old. Naturally, the Nazis also targeted the girls. Two branches were created for them. The first, Jugendmädelbund, or the League of German Girls from 10 to 14 years old, and the second, Bund Deutsche Mädel, the League of Girls from 14 to 18 years old. A sweet name, but a sinister essence. In 1931, Hitler appointed the charismatic and ambitious Baldur von Schirach as the head of the youth movement. By the time the Führer came to power in January 1933, Schirach had managed to swell the ranks of the movement to 100,000 children. By the end of that year, over 2 million teenagers had joined the Hitler Youth, nearly a third of Germany's 10 to 18-year-olds. But even that was not enough for them. In 1936, membership became mandatory. Refusal threatened not only with fines but also with suspicion of disloyalty. Parents who prevented their children from joining risked losing their jobs, and some even their freedom. By 1939, more than 90% of all German children were members of the Nazi youth organization. It wasn't an alternative to school. It was a second school, more important, more fanatical. Behind the facade of a happy childhood was a carefully constructed system, not just of upbringing, but of reprogramming. And soon these children would learn to line up not only on command. They would march on command, shoot without hesitation, and report others without a guilty conscience. I start with the youth. The weak must be cast aside. I want to raise a generation of young people before whom the whole world will tremble. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, 1925. Everyday life between games and brainwashing was not an ordinary childhood routine. Their day started with school and ended not with cartoons, but with lectures on racial superiority and military exercises. Hitler Jugend offered sports and adventure, but was actually a soldier factory. By age 10, children learned to march, read maps, shoot, and were taught to obey without question or doubt. I want to see not weak, but strong youth in Germany. My youth will know neither weakness nor doubt. Hitler, speech before 50,000 youths in Nuremberg, 1935. Every step of their lives was filled with symbols. The swastika was not just on the flag, it was in songs, in games, in fairy tales. While some children played cowboys and Indians, they played Jews and Aryans. In the evenings, torchlight processions and tales of fallen heroes replaced hobby clubs. Teenagers read the biographies of murdered Sturmabteilung and National Socialist German Workers' Party members, learned their names, and were taught that dying for the homeland was not a tragedy, but an honor. They were taught not just to be loyal to the Führer, but to even suspect their own parents. In schools and squads, children were told that if their mom or dad spoke badly about Hitler, it was a crime against Germany, and many really did report them. Berlin, 1943. 12-year-old Helmut Hübner, an active member of the Hitler Youth, heard his father joke in the kitchen, "Hitler will mess everything up again. They should have sent him to the artillery instead." The next day, Helmut reported it to headquarters, and his father was arrested by the Gestapo. Helmut became an example for others. That's how the system worked. The child is no longer part of the family. He is a soldier of the Reich, and the Führer is more important than his own mother. Everyday life in the Hitler Youth is not just a strict routine, it's a life under constant pressure from ideology where there is no room for weakness, doubt, or compassion. Here you are taught to march and to hate, and a mentor's smile can turn into an order to inform. The dark side is violence, fear, and bullying. Behind the facade of discipline and patriotism, there was something else, a strict hierarchy, a system of humiliation, and the breaking of will. In the Hitler Youth, weakness was considered a disgrace. Newcomers were put through endurance tests. They were forced to march 20 kilometers with full gear, spend the night alone in the forest, and endure beatings as character training. One boy couldn't take it and collapsed unconscious. No one felt sorry for him. They said he was a disgrace to the Führer. Excerpt from memoirs. Humiliations were frequent. Anyone not fitting the Aryan ideal was teased, beaten, and isolated. In several cases, there were recorded suicides of teenagers who could not withstand the pressure and abuse. One of the most well-known cases is that of 15-year-old Franz, who hanged himself after older boys forced him to clean toilets every day and beat him with belts. Bund Deutsche Mädel, the League of German Girls, was official preparation for the role of mothers, with home economics lessons and songs around the campfire. But the reality was different. Thousands of girls from the Bund Deutsche Mädel became participants in the Lebensborn program, where they were forced to have relationships with SS soldiers in order to give birth to racially pure Aryans. The girls were taught, "Your main mission is to give birth for the Reich. Not love, not choice, but biology and orders. A woman's body belongs to the nation. It is a vessel in which future fighters for the Führer are nurtured, according to the propaganda magazine National Socialist Freundwarte." Some children tried to escape, to run from ideology, from violence, from broken lives. Those who were caught were not sent home, but to a camp, Moringen. It was one of the first re-education camps for minors. where children deemed incorrigible for desertion, disobedience, or simply poor ideological training were held. There, they didn't beat you with slogans. They beat you for real for refusing to march, cold solitary confinement, for crying, deprivation of food, for fear, and even more fear. In the Hitler Youth, children weren't just taught to be patriots, they were broken, and instead of a childhood, they were given only one choice, either become a predator or a victim. War. Children used as cannon fodder. Since the beginning of the war, everything became more serious. The Hitler Youth turned from a summer camp into a training camp for the front lines. According to Time magazine, in 1941 during math lessons, children calculated ballistics and bullets, and they studied astronomy using sextants and aerodynamics. What the Hitler Youth had prepared for from the start finally occurred in the war's last years, beginning in 1943. All boys were required to join the army at the age of 17. When the fronts collapsed and the army faced huge losses, the last reserves, children, even 15-year-olds, were sent to the front. These boys, brainwashed by ideology, became fanatical, obedient, and absolutely miserable soldiers from a young age. We went into battle not because we wanted to, but because we believed it would be shameful not to go. Former member of the Hitler Youth Division in 1944, a whole tank division was formed from young men born in 1926. The SS, which took part in the Oradour operation in the Battle of Normandy and in the execution of prisoners, including Canadian soldiers, at the Oradour Abbey. And when things got really bad, even children were taken from schools to fight in the war. The main thing was to be fanatical and with a chevron. Some were ordered to go on suicide attacks, and those who refused were shot on the spot. In the fall of that same year, 1944, Hitler signed an order to create the Volkssturm, a people's militia. It included men from 16 to 60 years old, but in reality, they took anyone who could hold a weapon, including 13 and 14-year-old teenagers from the Hitler Youth. During the defense of Berlin in the spring of 1945, many of the street battles were fought by teenagers. They waited in basements with Panzerfausts for Soviet tanks, often lacking food, communication, or any chance of survival. They were told, "You are the last line of defense of the Reich." They believed it and died without a chance, without meaning, without the right to be children. In parallel with the Volkssturm, the Nazis created the Werewolf Project, a network of underground saboteurs who were trained in case Germany was occupied, in Werewolf. They massively recruited teenagers from the Hitler Youth, promising them they would become partisans, heroes of the future, but in reality, they were thrown behind enemy lines without support, without supplies, without a chance. They were taught to mine roads, plant explosives in buildings, and set up ambushes. But when the Reich fell, no one evacuated them. Many were simply left to die. In these records, you can see the whole journey from excitement to horror, from blind faith to the realization that you are just a pawn in someone else's game. On the posters, they were heroes, but in reality, they were cannon fodder. The Third Reich didn't care how old they were. They were taught to die before they were taught to live. On April 20, 1945, Hitler's birthday, he left the bunker for the last time. He was surrounded by young soldiers, their chests gleaming with iron crosses, beaming with pride. He said, "I am still convinced that victory will be ours, especially thanks to our youth. Thanks to you, my boys." Chronik der Wochenschau, April 1945. 10 days later, Hitler committed suicide. No fireworks, no last words. After the war, the fates of former members. In 1945, everything collapsed. Hitler was dead, the Reich was dead. But what happened to the millions of teenagers who were raised as fanatics from a young age? Where did Hitler's children go? For many years after the war, Hitler's children remained silent. Society didn't want to hear their stories, and they themselves didn't even want to remember. The first candid interviews began in the 1970s and 1980s. Some people tried to understand, others to justify, but most said, "We were both victims and participants." Some teenagers from the Hitler Youth later became activists in anti-Nazi movements and took part in exposing Nazi crimes at the Nuremberg trials. The SS, Gestapo, and National Socialist German Workers' Party were declared criminal organizations, but not the Hitler Youth, because they were recognized as victims of brainwashing, essentially children who were used by the system. It would have been absurd to hold 12 to 16-year-olds accountable for Nazism, but it was also impossible to let them go with a clear conscience. Some former members of the Hitler Youth became professors, journalists, doctors. They dedicated their lives to correcting the mistakes of their youth, but there were others as well. In the 1950s and 60s, several non-Nazi movements emerged, organized specifically by former members of the Hitler Youth, and some of them maintained their faith in the Führer until the end of their lives. Society was not able to rehabilitate everyone equally. Some became fighters for the truth, while others carried the old evil into a new era. Conclusion: Hitler Youth is a lie? This is a children's organization, a machine for creating superhumans, which in reality broke the lives of millions. Behind the perfect facade there was fear, violence, broken families, and lost childhood. In this story, what's important is not only the scale, but also how easily society can replace upbringing with programming, children's games with military marches, and trust with blind faith in a leader. Could the Hitler Youth appear again? I want to believe that it can't, but history is treacherous, and the present time is proof of that. And while adults are looking into the past, and at this video, someone is already writing a new manual on raising fanatics. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye everyone.